In this unit, we'll be talking about trademarking your product. And we'll begin in the first lesson by talking about a case study or several case studies related to trademarks. Then talk about what can be trademarked, some general principles. In the third, about some questions, things that are not quite so clear. And then finally, in the last one, we'll talk about iGEM and the particular trademarks or products that they have developed for each of the different years. Now again, why do you need to know about this? This is not something that is covered in many classes on academic writing. But this is particularly important for iGEM because iGEM has a goal of developing a marketable product. And so this is something that from the very beginning, most teams will consider. Right after they decide what to study, they need to look at the competitors, different products, the market, so that they can understand the potential for the product in the market.
Now, let's talk about why names matter. Maybe we are familiar with a Shakespearean play, Romeo and Juliet. Juliet, who fell in love with Romeo, but couldn't marry him because the two families are fighting. So she cannot marry somebody with the name of Montague. And as a result, Juliet said, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet." Just like those roses. If we don't call them roses, can they smell as sweet?
Well, if we call them in Chinese, 玫瑰, do they still smell as sweet?
Yes, 玫瑰. So sweet.
So apparently it's true that by any other name, a rose would smell as sweet.
Same thing. What is the name of our country? By any other name, it would not smell as sweet. Now, let me give a case. This case is from Janine Lenting and Roger Shai, 1990. They talk about a trademark infringement case between McDonald's and McSleep. McSleep was proposed by Quality Inn to be a new name for a chain hotel. The problem is McSleep is this name somehow associated with McDonald's. That's the problem. So as a result, McSleep was never registrable. And it didn't work out because McDonald's complained about it. Now, the thing is, Mc or Mac, what does it mean by Mac? Is Mac the prefix confusing? Because we don't know what it refers to. That's not true. How about Mac? Is it very competitive? Everybody wants to name their product Mac. Number 3, is Mac a very common name? So it's garden variety, nothing special. Or Mac is already generic. For example, it means convenient, fast, inexpensive, and so on. So that's the problem here. What's the meaning of the prefix Mac? Now let's see. If we think Mc or Mac is directly associated with McDonald's, then how about a Malaysian restaurant, McCurry? Is it okay for McCurry to name their restaurant McCurry, which has no association with McDonald's? I think McDonald's will again complain about this.
I'm sure.
So in other words, as there are so many companies, so many trademarks that are trying to adopt Mc to their business, McDonald's has to be very proactive by registering all possible names referring to McDonald's worldwide. For example, in Taiwan, the Chinese translation is 麦当劳, but McDonald's also have a nickname, which is 麦当当, 当当, ding ding dang dang. It's so cute and it sounds so loud and clear. So 麦当当 is also registered
Mm.
And how about in Australia? In Australia, McDonald's also has a nickname, which is Macca. So Macca is also registered. And then let's talk about, names which sound very similar. For example, huli huli sauce. Then in Hawaii, there's another sauce which is proposed to called hula huli sauce.
Mm.
Hula hula, in Hawaii is a very common dance. So if we call it hula huli sauce, we can feel this is related to Hawaii, and somehow it's also related to huli huli sauce. So as a result, the similarity in sound and appearance are not possible for a trademark, for a new product, because they're too similar. But then we look at hula huli, look at this vowel quality, e, from an open vowel to a closed vowel. It covers a wide range. It's actually very creative. Mm-hmm. In a sense, it's better than huli huli, just complete reduplication. So what is registrable? That's the question here. When we want to register our trademark or our product name, on the one hand, we have to think about, is this name too descriptive? Like it's tasty, or it's good, it's wonderful, it's too descriptive. It's not registrable. How about it's deceptive? You said this water is bubbling water, but there's no bubble. Okay, then that's deceptive. Or if it causes confusion, do you mean you are related to another product, a very reputable, a famous product?
So that's the problem with the mic or the hula huli, the things that sound and look somewhat like the other products.
Of course, these are all very controversial issues. That's why, lawyers have cases to work on.
And make lots of money themselves.
Yes. And we all know if you want to make something marketable, the name is really important. Mm-hmm. It has to sound right. And it has to have a positive association with some good quality. Now let's talk about those names for iGEM products.
Okay, the first year iGEM, we helped them to come up with a name. They were trying to develop a product to detect chemicals in the saliva in your mouth that would indicate the presence of cavities. Now there's an existing product called Carefree. It's based on the idea caries is the Latin name, the medical name for dental cavities. And the name Carefree sounds like carefree. So you're both caries free and carefree because you can use this product. So it has a very positive association. But this is for prevention. It doesn't assess the risk. It simply raises the pH in your mouth so that it reduces the risk of cavities. So for their product, the first iGEM team said, we like the name Carnatos. What do you think? And I said, what does that come from? And they said, oh, it's a mix of caries and thanatos. All right, caries I knew, that's dental cavities. What's thanatos? And they said, oh, it's from Greek mythology. It's the personification of death. Now, I'm fairly familiar with Greek mythology, but I was not familiar with thanatos. So it had no association for me. And even if you know it, it's like, what does that mean then? Death to cavities? I think that's what they were trying to go for. But it sounds rather odd. And so I proposed a number of questions for them, or potential problems with that name. One is that car isn't enough to convey caries, because car, care, there are a lot of different things that have car as part of it. Number two, caries comes from Latin, whereas thanatos is from Greek. And if you're mixing different base languages, that's somewhat of a problem. Third, as I said, Thanatos is a very minor character in Greek mythology and therefore carries no association for most people. And even if they do get it, do you really want to associate your product with death? Maybe, maybe not. And then the final one was, knowing a little bit of Spanish, and I look at carnatos, to me it looks more like carne, meat, and nato, born of meat. It's totally different association and therefore causes confusion. So they had a list of 26 other candidates, and that's a good idea. It's a good place to begin to brainstorm multiple possibilities. We'll talk more about that in the last video in this unit. But it's good then, after you do that, to group them and think about which is the best in a group, or what are problems with a group as a whole. Some of their names were arbitrary. They had things like tell me and prophesier. Okay, tell me what, prophesy what. There's no association with carries. And then sweetie, because it's someone close to you that you'll use every day, and then love. But sweet is what causes cavities.
Yes.
So all of these have associations, but they're with totally different things, and therefore cause no association with the product. And then they had three others: eye care, eye tooth, and eye prophecy. And I said, well, yeah, but eye is sort of locked up by Mac. iPhones, iPads, everything is associated with Mac. And if you name it that, you're going to have problems for sure. And then they had a whole bunch that were related to oral, like oral trainer, oral guardian, oral hypothesis, or shortening that to oral hypothesis, oral icon, and repressal, which they came from repressor and oral. And again, all of these, well, oral trainer, what are you training your mouth to do? They were thinking of the idea of training this program with big data, but no consumer is going to get that. Oral guardian, well, it's important to guard your mouth, both what goes in and what comes out. But again, what's the association with cavities? Hypothesis, that's just, it's too scientific. It doesn't work. Icon, again, icon is somebody that you worship. We worship your mouth, or I don't know. Again, it just doesn't work to me. So all of those didn't seem to work very well. And then they had a number associated with teeth, tooth, haha. All right, that's kind of cute. I think the idea was make your teeth happy. Yeah, okay, but it sounds kind of childish. And then they had others associated with prophecy, like tooth prop or tooth prof. But they didn't say tooth, they said toot, like toot prop, toot. Toot is not tooth, it's different. And so again, when you shorten something to try to make it cute, it can cause problems. And then they had one, save teeth. That's very descriptive, but not very trademarkable. Or salicon, which again was from saliva and icon. And well, they used saliva in the test, but still icon. Yeah, well, I'm going to worship saliva. You have to think of how other people who are not familiar with your product are going to think about this. And so the last two groups are more related to either cavity or caries, and they made more sense. But the first one they said was cavity cause uncomfortable, or CCU. Well, okay, that makes sense here.
CCU, cavity cause uncomfortable. CCU, our university is going to complain.
I think so. plus cavity cause uncomfortable doesn't make any sense.
No.
And then they had CP calculator, cavity predict calculator. Okay, but it didn't really calculate. It measured, it maybe predicted, but calculator didn't fit. And then they had Kaggle, which they said was from cavity and angel. But Aggle and angel are not the same. And then some like caveaway. Maybe that's getting closer. Or discavity, or decavity, or detevity. Detevity didn't work because evity is a common ending of words like levity or longevity that indicate a characteristic of something. So detevity would be like the characteristic of detection. I don't know. It didn't work. But the caveaway, or maybe changing that to like carries away, that could work. Or decavity, maybe shortening it to decav, something like that could also work. So these are, when you get something that looks possible, then you can think about, well, what are some ways we could modify that to make it even better? And then they had a bunch again related to Caries. They had Caries Explorer, which they shortened to Care Explorer. But when you write it, it looks like Car Explorer. So we tried to buy a new car or what? And then they had some related to Caduceus. Again, do you know what a Caduceus is? And Caduceus is that medical symbol with the two snakes wrapped around. But again, someone in that group knew a lot of mythology and knew that was related to health. But most people wouldn't get that association. And then they had Caricator for Caries Indicator. But again, someone looking at that name would have a hard time guessing the ator was from indicator, because again, it's a common ending, meaning something that does something. So you need to be careful when you take just the ending of a word that is a common ending with many words. And they had Cariproof. Okay, but again, in this case, it may be a little deceptive because it's not making your mouth proof or prevention of caries, but just indicating. And then finally, what they decided on was Carindex, Caries Index. Sounds a lot like care, just like the original product we talked about. It's an index, it's something that indicates the level of potential of caries. So that worked. And now, as I said, in the next tape, we'll look at some basic principles for forming trademarks, then some questions about those principles, and finally look at the other names that were discussed by other groups in the final video in this series.